Absolutely, here's your rewritten script in a smooth, engaging YouTube-style format, with no highlights, no bullet points, and kept as a full-flowing script. I also expanded it significantly, so it feels much closer to a long-form storytelling script. Since you said same words, no highlights, I kept the original meaning, tone, and structure very close while making it sound cleaner, more natural, and more detailed for a longer narration. You guys, you are seriously not going to believe this. When this news first broke, it hit like an absolute bombshell, and honestly, it sent shockwaves across the entire sports world. We're talking about Tiger Woods, one of the greatest athletes of all time, one of the most iconic names not just in golf, but in sports history, and suddenly headlines everywhere were saying the same thing: Tiger Woods had been arrested for DUI. It was the kind of headline that felt almost unreal the moment people saw it. For so many fans, the first reaction was pure disbelief, mixed with a lot of confusion, concern, and honestly, sadness. Because when you hear a story like that attached to a name like Tiger Woods, it immediately grabs your attention, in a way very few sports stories ever could. And that's really where the whole story starts. The shock factor was enormous. This wasn't just some random athlete getting into trouble. This was Tiger Woods. This was a man who had built a reputation over decades as one of the most disciplined, focused, and driven competitors the sports world had ever seen. A guy who dominated golf in a way that almost seemed impossible. A guy whose name became bigger than the sport itself. So when the news broke about his arrest, the immediate question on everyone's mind was simple: what happened? How did we get here? What led to one of the greatest athletes of all time being found in this kind of situation? It didn't seem to fit the image people had of him, and that disconnect made the story even more shocking. At first, there was a lot of confusion. Information was coming out slowly, and people were trying to piece together what exactly had happened. Early headlines made it sound dramatic and alarming, and social media was exploding with reactions. Fans, commentators, sports analysts, and even people who didn't normally follow golf were all talking about it. Anytime Tiger Woods is involved in anything, it becomes a major story. But this was different. This wasn't about a tournament. This wasn't about a comeback. This wasn't about another iconic moment on the golf course. This was about an arrest, and that alone made it feel surreal. As more details started to emerge, the picture became clearer, even though it also became more concerning. The incident happened early on a Monday morning, just outside Jupiter, Florida. Police responded to the scene and found Tiger Woods inside his Mercedes-Benz. The car was running, and he was asleep at the wheel. That image alone was enough to stun people. One of the most famous athletes in the world, sitting in his vehicle in the early hours of the morning, clearly not in a normal condition. Officers approached the car, and right away it was obvious that something was wrong. He appeared disoriented, confused, and had difficulty responding to basic questions. That's when the seriousness of the situation really started to set in. According to the initial police report, Tiger's condition raised immediate concern. Officers noted that his speech was slurred. He seemed to have trouble with coordination. He was slow to react and appeared dazed. For anyone hearing those details, it sounded bad. Really bad. And at that stage, a lot of people naturally assumed the worst. The phrase DUI arrest automatically leads people to think alcohol, and because of that, the early narrative was exactly what you would expect. People believed Tiger Woods had been drinking and driving. That assumption spread fast, and it became the dominant headline almost immediately. Then, when dashcam footage from the police encounter later surfaced, it added another layer to the public reaction. Seeing it with your own eyes made the situation feel even more real. The footage showed officers trying to wake him up, trying to understand what was going on, trying to assess his condition. It was tense. It was uncomfortable. And for many fans, it was genuinely hard to watch. This was not the Tiger Woods people were used to seeing. This wasn't the calm, composed, laser-focused athlete standing on the 18th green with a tournament on the line. This was a vulnerable, disoriented version of Tiger, caught in a moment that felt deeply personal yet was suddenly public for the entire world to see. And that's one of the reasons this story resonated so strongly. It wasn't just about a celebrity arrest. It was about seeing someone who had spent so much of his life being viewed as almost superhuman suddenly appear human in a very raw and unsettling way. Tiger Woods had always carried this aura around him. Even through all the ups and downs of his career, even through injuries, surgeries, scandals, and pressure, he still represented greatness, control, and intensity. So to see him in that moment, struggling to respond, clearly impaired, sitting in a running car on the side of the road, It created a kind of emotional whiplash for fans who had followed him for years. As the investigation continued, more information came out, and that's when the story took a major turn. Initially, as expected, there was a lot of speculation about alcohol, but authorities later confirmed that alcohol was not involved. That changed everything. Toxicology reports and further details revealed that Tiger Woods was not under the influence of alcohol at all. Instead, tests showed the presence of several prescription medications in his system. That was a huge development, because it completely shifted the narrative. What initially looked like a classic drunk driving story suddenly became something much more complicated and much more nuanced. Once people learned that alcohol was not the issue, the conversation changed from outrage to concern. Instead of focusing on the idea of reckless drinking, the public began to focus on something else entirely: pain, medication, recovery, and how easily things can go wrong when someone is dealing with serious physical issues. And in Tiger's case, that context mattered a lot. By that point in his life, he had already gone through a long and difficult battle with back pain and multiple surgeries. His body had taken a tremendous toll over the years. For a player whose entire career depended on power, rotation, and precision, back problems were devastating. And anyone who had been following his career knew he had been fighting through pain for a long time. That context didn't excuse what happened, but it did help explain it. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about an arrest. It became about a world-famous athlete struggling with the aftermath of physical breakdown. It became about how chronic pain can affect a person's life behind the scenes, even when the public only sees the highlights, the trophies, and the smiles. It became about the reality that even the greatest athletes are still human beings, and when they're dealing with injuries, surgeries, and recovery, they can end up in very dangerous situations. Then came one of the most unforgettable parts of the entire story, the mugshot. And if you remember when that image started circulating, you know exactly how powerful it was. It was stark. It was jarring. It was one of those images that instantly becomes part of the story forever. Seeing Tiger Woods in a mugshot was something a lot of people never imagined they would witness. It felt symbolic in a way. For years, he had been photographed holding trophies, wearing red on Sunday, raising his fist after impossible shots, standing as the face of greatness in golf. Now, suddenly, the image attached to the headlines was a booking photo. That contrast was impossible to ignore. The mugshot became more than just a photo. It became the visual representation of the entire incident. It was shared everywhere. It fueled debate. It triggered commentary from every angle. Some people were disappointed. Some were angry. Some were deeply sympathetic. Others saw it as yet another chapter in a life that had already experienced so many public highs and painful lows. But regardless of how people reacted, almost everyone agreed on one thing: it was sad. It was sad to see someone of Tiger Woods' stature in that position. Not long after, Tiger Woods released a public statement, and that statement became a critical part of how the story evolved. In it, he took full responsibility for what happened. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to shift blame. He acknowledged that he had been undergoing treatment for his back pain, and that he had taken medication. He admitted that he had an unexpected reaction to the prescribed medicines, and that he did not realize how strongly they had affected him. He expressed deep regret for what happened. He apologized to his family, his friends, and his fans. And he openly acknowledged the disappointment he had caused. That statement mattered because it gave people something they were looking for: honesty. It didn't erase the seriousness of the incident, but it showed accountability. In moments like that, public response often depends on how the person involved reacts. And Tiger's response was straightforward. He owned the mistake. He admitted he was wrong. He made it clear that he understood the seriousness of the situation. And for many people, that level of accountability made a difference. Still, the story sparked bigger conversations that went beyond Tiger Woods himself. People started talking more seriously about prescription medication and impaired driving. Because the truth is, a lot of people associate DUI only with alcohol, but that's not always the case. Prescription medications, especially when mixed or taken in ways that affect alertness and coordination, can be just as dangerous. That became one of the major lessons people took from the situation. This wasn't a simple story of someone drinking too much. It was a reminder that impairment can come in different forms, and the consequences can still be extremely serious. And in Tiger's case, the timing made everything feel even heavier. He was already in a difficult stage of his career physically. He was trying to manage pain, recover from procedures, and figure out whether he could even compete at a high level again. There were questions about his future in golf. There were doubts about whether his body could handle the demands of the sport. And then this happened. So not only did it affect his public image, it also cast even more uncertainty over his professional future. People weren't just asking how this happened. They were asking whether Tiger Woods would ever really come back from it, in every sense of the word. At that moment, it felt like one more devastating setback in a career that had already experienced so many twists. Because if you look at Tiger Woods' story as a whole, it's one of the most dramatic arcs in sports history. He rose to superstardom at an incredibly young age. He changed golf forever. He became a cultural phenomenon. He inspired millions. He shattered records. He dominated the sport. Then came injuries. Then came personal controversy. Then came surgeries. Then came years of questions about whether he was finished. Every time it looked like he might be down for good, there was always some part of people that still believed maybe, just maybe, Tiger had one more comeback in him. But after the DUI arrest, that belief became even harder to hold on to. Not impossible, but harder. Because now it wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about trust, judgment, and perception. Public image matters, especially for someone who had spent years under the microscope. And this incident undeniably impacted how people saw him. Even fans who supported him had to process the disappointment. Even those who sympathized with the prescription medication angle still understood that getting behind the wheel while impaired was dangerous and unacceptable. At the same time, there was also a lot of compassion, because many people could see that this wasn't a story about partying or reckless celebrity behavior in the usual sense. This looked like someone who was in pain, someone who was dealing with the effects of medication, someone who made a serious mistake, and someone who was now facing the consequences of it in front of the entire world. That doesn't remove responsibility, but it does create a more human understanding of the situation. And that's why the public conversation around Tiger's arrest ended up being more layered than many celebrity scandals usually are. For some, the incident also served as a reminder of how isolated elite athletes can become. From the outside, we see success, wealth, trophies, endorsements, and status. But behind the scenes, especially for someone like Tiger Woods, there was immense pressure, constant scrutiny, and years of physical punishment. The body of a professional golfer may not get talked about the same way as football or basketball, but the wear and tear is very real, especially when you've spent decades generating power through your spine and core the way Tiger did. Add surgeries, chronic pain, rehabilitation, expectations, and the burden of always being Tiger Woods, and you begin to understand how complicated life can become, even for someone who seems larger than life. That's part of why the story stayed in the headlines for so long. It wasn't just a simple arrest report. It was Tiger Woods. It was about pain management. It was about accountability. It was about celebrity, pressure, image, and the fragility of even the most iconic figures. And the more people talked about it, the more it became clear that this was one of those moments that would permanently become part of the Tiger Woods legacy, whether fans wanted it to or not. But then, as time passed, something remarkable happened. Tiger Woods did what Tiger Woods has done so many times in his life. He kept going. He faced the consequences. He dealt with the fallout. He continued his recovery. He worked through more physical challenges. He stayed in the conversation. And slowly, the narrative began to shift again. What once looked like a defining low point started to become one chapter in a much larger story. A painful chapter, yes. A deeply embarrassing and serious one, absolutely. But not the final chapter. And that's where Tiger's resilience really comes into focus. Because if there's one thing you cannot deny about Tiger Woods, it's that he has an almost unbelievable ability to endure setbacks and keep fighting. That resilience is one of the reasons so many people remain fascinated by him. Even after public scandal, injuries, surgeries, and incidents like this, he kept finding ways to re-emerge. He kept pushing forward. He kept doing what champions do when everything seemed stacked against them. And eventually, the sports world got to witness one of the most incredible comeback stories ever. When Tiger returned to the top of the golf world, it changed how many people viewed everything that came before it. It didn't erase the arrest. It didn't rewrite the facts. It didn't make the mistake disappear. But it did show something powerful, that even after hitting a very low point, even after public embarrassment, even after physical and personal struggles, a person can still rebuild. A person can still recover. A person can still find their way back to greatness. That's why this story remains so compelling even years later. On the surface, it's about a shocking DUI arrest involving a legendary athlete. But underneath that, it's really about something bigger. It's about how quickly public perception can shift. It's about how fragile the image of invincibility really is. It's about the hidden cost of pain and recovery. It's about accountability after a mistake. And ultimately, it's about resilience. So if we really recap the entire situation, here's what stands out. The initial shock was massive because no one expected to see Tiger Woods associated with a DUI arrest. The public reaction was driven by disbelief, confusion, and concern. As the facts emerged, the story became more complex. Authorities confirmed that alcohol was not involved, but prescription medications were. That changed the narrative from a typical drunk driving case into something more layered and more serious in a different way. Tiger took responsibility. He apologized. He acknowledged his mistake. He faced intense public scrutiny. And over time, he began the long process of recovery, not just physically, but personally and professionally as well. It was a difficult time, no question about it. It absolutely impacted the way people saw him. For a while, it became one of the defining headlines attached to his name. It was uncomfortable. It was disappointing. It was sad. But it was also real. And sometimes the most powerful stories in sports aren't just about championships and trophies. Sometimes they're about the moments when the greatest athletes fall, how the world reacts, and what happens next. In Tiger's case, what happened next is what made the story unforgettable. Because instead of disappearing under the weight of that moment, he found a way to keep moving forward. He endured. He recovered. He fought. And eventually, he reminded the world why his story is unlike anyone else's. That doesn't mean the arrest should be ignored or minimized. It means the full story includes both the fall and the comeback, both the mistake and the response, both the vulnerability and the strength. And maybe that's why people still talk about this incident so much, not just because it was shocking, but because it revealed something real about someone who had spent so much of his life being treated like a symbol rather than a person. In that moment, Tiger Woods wasn't just a legend or a brand or a highlight reel. He was a human being who made a serious mistake while dealing with pain, medication, and a difficult chapter in life. And the world saw it all unfold in real time. That's what made it feel so heavy. That's what made it more than just another headline. That's what made fans, critics, and even casual observers stop and pay attention. Because when someone as iconic as Tiger Woods stumbles publicly, it forces everyone to look at the difference between the image and the reality. It forces a conversation about pressure, health, responsibility, and redemption. And in the end, that's exactly what this story became. So yes, the initial shock was enormous. Yes, the details were concerning. Yes, the mugshot was unforgettable. Yes, the revelation about prescription medication changed the entire conversation. Yes, his apology and accountability mattered. And yes, it was a painful chapter that affected his image in a major way. But it also became part of a larger story about resilience, recovery, and one of the most remarkable comeback narratives sports has ever seen. Tiger Woods has always been a figure who inspires strong reactions. People admire him. People debate him. People analyze every chapter of his life and career. And this incident became one of those chapters that people